नमस्कार, द पब्लिक न्यूज़ 24 में आपका स्वागत है। मैं हूं योगेश और मैं आपके लिए लाया हूं विज्ञान की खबरें। 2020 में कौन है भारत के प्रमुख वैज्ञानिक, आज हम इस मुद्दे पे चर्चा करेंगे। हाल में ही स्टैनफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी के एक एक्सपर्ट टीम ने दुनिया के लगभग 1,60,000 वैज्ञानिकों की सूची निकाली। यह वैज्ञानिक साइंस एवं इंजीनियरिंग के अलग अलग डोमेन और सब डोमेन से चुने गए। आज हम जानेंगे कि इसमें भारत के वैज्ञानिक और भारत के संस्था जैसे कि IISc, IIT, ISRO, एम्स, DRDO का क्या परफॉर्मेंस रहा, हम दुनिया में साइंस में कहाँ खड़े हैं। हमने इन्हीं में से एक वैज्ञानिक डॉक्टर अमरेश चक्रवर्ती से भी बात की। अमरेश सर, जिन्होंने अपनी पढ़ाई कैम्ब्रिज से की और पारिवारिक और सामाजिक ज़रूरतों को समझते हुए भारत आए। भारत से कैम्ब्रिज और कैम्ब्रिज से भारत आने का ये सफ़र को आप ज़रूर देखें। पर विडंबना की बात तो ये है कि हमारे वैज्ञानिकों को डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म, मूवीज़ और पर्दों के सामने एक असामाजिक, अपारिवारिक, थोड़ा मतलबी, थोड़ा सनकी दिखाया जाता है। वहीं ग्लैमर की दुनिया को पर्दों के सामने हीरो दिखाया जाता है, पर पर्दों के पीछे की सच्चाई आपको मालूम ही है। अगर आपको सच में वैज्ञानिकों की रिस्पेक्ट है तो आप इस खबर को ज़रूर देखें। और आपको अगर ये लगता है कि भारत रिसर्च में बहुत पीछे है तो ऐसा बिल्कुल भी नहीं है। अगर आप किसी भी रैंकिंग को उठाकर देखेंगे तो भारत का इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ साइंस बेंगलोर रिसर्च पेपर साइटेशन पर फैकल्टी में पूरी दुनिया पर नंबर 1 पे है। इवन MIT, स्टैनफोर्ड, कैम्ब्रिज और हार्वर्ड जैसे यूनिवर्सिटीज़ से भी आगे। हमने अमरेश सर से ये भी जाना कि इसके बावजूद ओवरऑल रैंकिंग में भारत के IISc जैसे संस्थान 90 से 100 में क्यों रहते हैं। अब आते हैं आज की खबर पर। तो हाल में ही PLOS बायोलॉजी में दुनिया के 1,60,000 प्रमुख वैज्ञानिकों का नाम सामने आया। यह सूची स्टैनफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी के एक एक्सपर्ट टीम ने तैयार की, जिसमें हर डोमेन के टॉप 2% वैज्ञानिकों को शामिल किया गया। इसमें लगभग साइंस और इंजीनियरिंग के 22 फील्ड और 176 सब फील्ड को शामिल किया गया। हर्ष की बात यह है कि इसमें भारत के 1494 वैज्ञानिकों का नाम रहा। इसमें से इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ साइंस बेंगलोर के प्रोफेसर GR देसीराजू अपने फील्ड, जो कि इनऑर्गेनिक और न्यूक्लियर केमिस्ट्री है, पूरी दुनिया में दूसरे स्थान पर रहे। अगर संस्थानों की बात करें तो भारत में सबसे ज़्यादा वैज्ञानिक इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ साइंस बेंगलोर के रहे। IISc के इस लिस्ट में लगभग 94 वैज्ञानिक रहे। इसके बाद IIT दिल्ली के 64 वैज्ञानिक इस लिस्ट में रहे। वहीं तीसरे, चौथे और 5वें स्थान पर IIT खड़गपुर, IIT बॉम्बे और IIT मद्रास रहे। आप लोगों को हैरानी होगी कि इस सूची में K Sivan जैसे वैज्ञानिक, जिनको आप जानते होंगे, उनका नाम नहीं रहा। ISRO और DRDO जैसे संस्थान से भी कम वैज्ञानिकों के नाम रहे। वहीं एकेडमिक साइंटिस्ट लोगों का नाम इसमें ज़्यादा रहा। इसका कारण इस लिस्ट को प्रिपेयर करने का क्राइटेरिया है। इस लिस्ट को तैयार करने का बेसिस पेपर पब्लिकेशंस के पैरामीटर हैं, जैसे कि साइटेशन, H इंडेक्स, ऑथर पोजीशन, कि आप फर्स्ट ऑथर हो कि सेकंड ऑथर हो, ये सब रहा। इसीलिए इसमें एकेडमिक साइंटिस्ट लोगों का दबदबा रहा। इस वैज्ञानिकों की सूची को वीडियो डिस्क्रिप्शन में लिंक से आप देख सकते हैं। आज उन्हीं में से एक हीरो, उन्हीं में से एक वैज्ञानिक डॉक्टर अमरेश चक्रवर्ती से हमने बात की। अमरेश सर का अपने क्षेत्र डिज़ाइन, जो कि मैकेनिकल इंजीनियरिंग का एक हिस्सा है, उसमें पूरी दुनिया में 66वां स्थान रहा। एक वर्सटाइल जॉइंट फैमिली से बिलोंग करने वाले अमरेश सर कैसे भारत के एक बड़े वैज्ञानिक बने, उसको आज जानते हैं। हमारे देश के कई युवा का कोई ड्रीम नहीं होता, वो ड्रीम नहीं सेट कर पाते हैं, और उनके लिए प्रोफेसर अमरेश चक्रवर्ती ने एक बहुत ही बड़ी बात कही कि अगर आपका कोई ड्रीम नहीं है तो आप मेरी तरह, ध्यान से सुनिएगा, तो आप मेरी तरह किसी काम को दिल से करिए। हमारे देश के कई युवा का कोई ड्रीम नहीं होता, वो ड्रीम नहीं सेट कर पाते हैं, और उनके लिए प्रोफेसर अमरेश ने एक बहुत ही बड़ी बात कही कि अगर आपका कोई ड्रीम नहीं है तो आप मेरी तरह किसी काम को दिल से करने में लग जाइए, वो अपने आप ही आपका ड्रीम बन जाएगा। तो चलिए मिलते हैं ऐसे ही एक इंस्पिरेशनल हीरो से। द पब्लिक न्यूज़ 24 में आपका स्वागत है एंड टुडे विथ अस इज प्रोफेसर अमरेश चक्रवर्ती and he is among top 2% scientist in his domain of design, and he is also the chairperson of CPDM department at ISC Bangalore. So first of all, sir, many congratulations. How's this feeling?
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that somebody actually read these news and found this. Yes, it's a good feeling. It's a kind of external validation of the hard work that all faculty members put together everywhere around the world, including IISc.
So one big question, sir, that you did your PhD from Cambridge, right? And in recent trend we have observed that people going abroad are not returning to India. So what motivated you to return to India and work here?
Yeah, so if you look at the list of faculty members at IISc, you will see that there is almost majority of them are actually from outside India, where they have done their PhD. I mean, for example, robotics lab Professor Ashita did his PhD from Stanford. And even now, I think we are receiving, I think just this year, I think included some 20 faculty members in Mechanical Sciences Division, 5 in CPDM in the last 5 years. All of them, well, almost all of them are with a PhD from outside, or certainly the postdoc from outside. So I think the trend is still there. And I think there are multiple reasons for coming back. One of them is, of course, to support the society that has actually made us what we are today. But there are also other things. People are connected to their own cultures, and therefore they would like to be in that culture. So that's another motivation. For me, of course, that has been the major motivation. Apart from the fact that, of course, your mom and dad and the elderly people, they need you to be around for the time that when they are elderly, right? Because they need your help. So that is the other reason why people come back.
Correct.
So it's a combination.
Yeah. So one question that many of my friends have asked, that among 1500 such scientists which were in the list, most of the scientists were academic scientists from academic background, and they found that some well-known names like Dr. K. Sivan, Ritu ma'am are missing. So what is the reason? What is the basis on which such list is made, or this ranking is made?
So this ranking is made on lifetime impact of researchers in terms of their academic impact. Now, how do you judge what is somebody's academic impact? I mean, this is again a topic that can be debated and discussed. But I think over a period of time, there are some parameters that have kind of stabilized as fairly, reliable measures of academic impact, and one of them is citations. So how many people are citing your work in their work, okay? And Scopus is one of the major databases that are counting those citations, and I think this assessment was run broadly based on the impact of somebody's work in terms of the number of citations received, as figured out by the Scopus database.
So sir, if you talk about citation, ISC is ranked 1 in citation per faculty, and its ranking is above MIT and Stanford also in this parameter. But when you talk about overall ranking of ISC, it is not, it is around 100. So what factors are taking ISC to such a position?
Yeah. So typically, if you look at any citation, any ranking or university ranking, now we are talking about. We are not only talking about research impact ranking. If you are talking about universities ranking, then you need to look at what are the activities that a university does. Number 1, it teaches. Number 2, it does research. Number 3, it supports practice. So if you take these 3 major parameters, then you can look at what indicators do you have for assessing how well it teaches, how well it does research, and how well it does support practice. And so there are multiple indicators that will come in each of them. For example, in teaching, it may be the teacher-student ratio. It may be the kind of teaching infrastructure that is available, the amount of funding that comes in teaching. Similarly, in practice, it may be the proportion of industrial funding that a university gets, and how well the alumni are doing, for example, in terms of supporting practice. So those are the kind of parameters. So if you take all of them into account and aggregate that, Then there are things like the amount of funding we get from industry, for instance, per capita into IISc compared to, let's say, MIT. See, MIT or Harvard are institutions where they are very strongly supported by their alumni in terms of the funding that they get. Many of them are very high positions in industry and other places. So, it is order of magnitude bigger than that of IISc. So that's one area where we lose out. Similarly, in teaching, we don't have a huge amount of undergrad teaching. And if there is a weightage for undergrad teaching, we lose out on that. So it is basically by doing that you see the overall ranking lower than some of those universities, even though our research ranking is very much on par.
So, sir, is there ISS planned any such thing that they will start any undergrad engineering education?
See, I mean, there are two ways to look at it. One is that do you want to chase those rankings? And then based on that, do you want to change your character? Or do you want to say, well, these are our characters and let us excel in what we are? So it's a course that, of course, the leadership at various points of time at IISc would decide. So I cannot speak for that, but my view is that it has to be something where the university has its own soul and it must keep its soul intact. And of course, if there are changes that it can make around that soul, that's fine. So for example, we have an undergrad program now, small one though, in natural sciences, because natural sciences is one area in which the country was traditionally not as good. So it strengthened that, whereas IITs already have a pretty good undergrad program in engineering. So, this is a question that IISc would have to ask itself, that by bringing in an undergrad program in engineering, what is it that they are going to bring to the table that is already not there? Because, in the past, if you look at the history of IISc, it has always been pioneering, academic activities in the country, and that includes creating institutions. For example, it initiated IIT system. It initiated ISARS, under Professor C.N.R. Rao's leadership, and it initiates TIFR. Those are some of the major chunks that are initiated by IISc. Then you look at the strategic sectors, the nuclear, the space, the aero. These are all initiated by IISc professors. So the whole idea is that when IISc should initiate an activity, it should have a vision of what is the distinct impact that it would have to the society at large, but India in particular. And so if there is a reason to have an undergrad program that really brings this very different view than what is already available and complementary one, then it should do it.
So next question is, your many students might also watch this video. So what role they had played in this success?
Oh, everything almost. I mean, if you look at me as a student, so then my supervisors and my fellow students, like those who are also working with me, you are a PhD student, so you know very well that even when you are a student and there is a student co-student with you, it's the interaction between the two of you, figuring out what are the problems that you are both facing, and then trying to work it out together. It is hugely useful, right?
Correct.
Even when I was doing my master's here at IISc in mechanical, there was a point at which I wrote my code, entire code, 6,000 lines of code for my MTech thesis, ME those days. And 3 days before the final exam, final Viva, my code had disappeared for some computer crash. And I was scrambling for help. Now who came to help? Some of my fellow students. They said, oh yeah, I'm from computer science, let me help. And they took the hard drive out and they did a search of that and they figured out, they managed to get 90% of that out of, retrieved. I still had to write 10% code in about 2 days without sleeping. But that's what your fellow students are. Now you go one step up and you become a professor or a teacher, and then you have students. But again, research is about figuring out what you don't know and then figuring out how we can answer this, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, you don't know as a professor. When you start, you don't know. So you have a dialogue that you start between the student and you to figure out what the real problem is and then solving it.
Yeah.
So, and when you become older, you will realize that these are special relationships. They become your friends. And together you are embarking on a journey to the unknown. And that's exciting. And that excitement is what keeps us going. It's because of our students.
Okay, so next question is, there are also many teenage and young minds who must be watching this video. So, and they are at the verge of setting their dreams. So when you were at their age, what was your orientation and motivation? Means what were your plans?
Yeah, I'm going to disappoint them here because I had no plans. Okay. I grew up in a family where we had multiple, it's a joint family with lots of people. Some father, for example, was a Sanskrit scholar. So he was interested in Kalidasa and Bhasa and so on. My uncle was an engineer. He was interested in how to fix bicycles or motorcycles. My aunt is an artist, so she was interested in Monet and Degas and Ramkinkar and so on. So I grew up in that atmosphere. So I was interested in all of them. So I didn't know what to do. So when it came to actually deciding, one of my father's friends was called because he said he was an engineer. So he said, well, I'm in civil engineering. This is not the right time for civil. Maybe you should go for mechanical. Okay, mechanical it is. So he picked up mechanical and went. So that's how those decisions used to be taken those days. Unlike today, where your entire universe is at your internet feet, and then you can pick all the information and decide. We are not like that. So we basically just trusted what our elders said, took it up, and then it went on based on that. So my suggestion is that, there are two ways to look at it. All the American serials will tell you that you have to pursue your dreams. But I must tell you that anything that you pursue hard, it becomes your dream. So it doesn't have to be that you have to have a dream first and then you pursue. Just work hard at whatever you do and see if it excites you. If it does, 99 out of 100 cases it would. Just make it your dream.
Next question is, what do you think is the current and future scope of research in India?
See, what is research after all? Research is about finding something generic about something that you can some confidence on, right? That is what research is. As we expand the boundaries of knowledge, we also expand the boundaries of unknown. And therefore research scope is also only going to increase as we grow more knowledge. More knowledge means more unknown, more knowledge of what you don't know. Therefore more research, okay? And given a society, now if you look at it from the utilitarian angle, okay, practical angle, there are so many people, the population is increasing at a certain rate, the overall resources to the world is limited. It's fixed. So it's a little bit like the Malthusian puzzle, that haunted Darwin, that led eventually to the Darwin and Wallace's theory of origin of the species, that your food get produced increases in arithmetic rate, whereas your population goes in geometrical rate, and there is a mismatch. Now, how are you going to match the mismatch? Only by having a fight, and then somebody has to survive. That's how the theory got developed, right? So if you look at it, the same thing is true here. Now we are not going to just have a fight. What we are going to have a fight is a fight of knowledge, with which we can come up with new ways that you can feed, for example, a much larger number of people in a geometrical fashion rather than arithmetic fashion. That's not going to come just like that, because that's not how the normal world operates. It is the new research that's going to provide us those means with which to do that. But maybe new research is also tell us that we have a much better way of living without requiring a lot of physical material and physical energy. So research can help us cut down our demands and wishes and requirements, and at the same time meet our requirements that are really necessary to be met. And there are big challenges in a country of this size. For example, the number of children, newborns that die, the number of new mothers that die, the amount of malnutrition that is there in the country. And so if you look at it, there are no dearth of problems. Every problem is a challenge, is an opportunity, and therefore an area for research.
Sir, on one personal question, what's your next challenge and goal, after achieving this? Okay, so anyway, the challenges go on without achievement. Achievements are something that other people look at it and say, okay, fine, you achieved. But I think over a period of time, again, you will realize that when you grow further, that beyond a certain point of time, your goals become internally driven. They are not externally driven. So you say, oh, this is important to be done. So right now I feel that what is important to be done are two things. Number one, see, there are very few institutions in the country that are teaching design, okay, as an activity. As a result, what happens is that when a
when I went to do my undergrad, I looked at all these courses that are being offered, heat transfer, fluid mechanics, solid mechanics, and so on and so forth. I thought, why are these jumble of disconnected pieces of knowledge being given to me? Could not make sense. I was so unhappy. I didn't want to come back to do further studies. And then my professors pushed me to IISc. But now I realize design is the glue. We are doing it because we need to connect the problems to the solutions, and the solutions will come as an integration of these pieces of knowledge. Now that understanding is not there with students. So they think, why are you solving these differential equations here and there? So that's my goal. One is, how do we bring design to the masses? That's number one. Number two is manufacturing. See, right now manufacturing is undergoing a major change in the society. It is becoming data-enabled manufacturing, or what is called Industry 4.0 or smart manufacturing. There are multiple names. But basic idea is that how can I bring data in order to do far more than we were able to do earlier? Okay, now if we can do that, we can use far less resources to do the same quality or even better quality of manufacturing. And this technology is going to completely transform manufacturing across the world. And if we do not catch up, our MSMEs are going to die. Our micro, medium, small enterprises that are holding 160 million jobs are going to die. 33% of manufacturing output in those. So how do we empower them with Industry 4.0? And that will require innovation. We have to create solutions that are not so expensive that only the corporates can afford them. They have to be substantially affordable and yet very, very good quality. So they have to be advanced affordable. So that's my challenge. So we are putting up, for example, as you know, a smart factory at IISc and whole bunch of technologies that we are developing ourselves so that we can offer them as platforms for the MSME startup.
थैंक यू सर, इट वॉज ग्रेट इंटरेक्टिंग विथ यू। उम्मीद करता हूँ कि आपको यह खबर पसंद आई। इसी तरह के विज्ञान के खबरों को जानने के लिए द पब्लिक न्यूज़ 24 से जुड़े रहें। द पब्लिक न्यूज़ 24 के यूट्यूब चैनल को लाइक और सब्सक्राइब ज़रूर करें। धन्यवाद।